Well, good afternoon, listeners. You're listening to Lament of Hope podcast, and I'm your host, Danielle Richardson. And I am very excited and honored to be speaking with Ilan Eshkeri. He is a British composer, and I have loved his work. One of my favorites is from The Young Victoria, and that's probably going to be familiar for many of you, but he wrote the soundtrack to that music. And it's just always been like I listened to it in college when I was studying and all this stuff. It was just it's beautiful. It's emotional. It was just very story driven and I loved it. Um and so I wanted to have him on the podcast, and as I was doing research about him, I knew that he studied music and literature, and that he has just a huge emphasis in storytelling and emotional storytelling in his works, which he's done several films and soundtracks, and all of that is on his website as well. But um, I what really compelled me to connect with this, as you guys know who listen to the show, is that life is very hard and life is sweet, and there's life in both of those things, and stories encapsulate both of those things, and good stories are able to just give those emotions to feel both at the same time. And it's hard to do that, but I feel like Elon's music does that very well. So, Elon, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So, I want to ask you because I've interviewed so many composers and musicians, and it's not that they didn't talk about emotions and storytelling, they did, but I felt like when I was researching about you, it's a huge emphasis of your work, and I wanted to ask you where that love of storytelling came from. Like, why is it so important to you that music be its own story and there be an emotional emphasis and that there be just a way for the human spirit to connect with it on a human level?
That is a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. So I'm not entirely prepared, but I think I can answer it. I have to if I take myself back to my childhood, I think it's about sort of those formative years with music. Um, I I have synesthesia, which is a mixing or a confusing of the senses. So I
Hmm.
associate colors with music, and I'm also dyslexic. So there's a lot of sort of cross wiring going on in my brain. And some of my earliest memories are listening to my mother playing Chopin. She's a huge Chopin fan and a very talented pianist. And and I would just listen to her playing in the living room, and I would sit on the carpet and would move my body and close my eyes and imagine things, not not stories in a literal sense, but colors and shapes and emotions that went along with the music that amounted to some sort of an emotional expression,
Hmm.
some sort of emotional narrative. And so music has always been that for me. And I think that I was always drawn to music that told stories. And I think that, you know, songs tell stories, and there's lots of music sometimes depicts very clear stories. Um, but sometimes music just takes you on an emotional journey, and that's a story too. And so that's what I've always been drawn to. For me, that's the purpose of music. The tension between suspension and resolve, which is what all of music is about.
Yeah.
And the space between that is the journey, is the emotional journey that you're on.
Is there, do you think there's something that makes a good story though? Because I mean, obviously there are a lot of stories out there, or a lot of films, a lot of music, like you said, but I do feel like some hit much closer to home than others. Like, I don't know, when I think about, one of my favorite pieces is Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings, and I mean, you can just listen to that, and it's so moving, and it feels like your soul. It's such a good lament. So if you're sad and listening to it, I mean, it encapsulates everything you're feeling, no matter what kind of sadness it is.
And it also
You feel it.
it opens the door for you, not just that piece, but any piece that a person connects to. It helps you to release the emotion or to
Yes,
explore the
yeah.
emotion. It encapsulates, no, that's not what I'm saying. It opens the door to to feel to help you feel that emotion.
But I was going to ask you, what kind of do you think there's something that makes a good story?
I think that stories stories are ways for human beings, for human culture, for human society to learn, right? We, as children, we read stories, we read nursery rhymes, we learn about what it is to be human through stories. The whole
Mhm.
history of humanity is passed down through stories. And stories that become canonical, like that are the important ones of the moment, I think appear at the time when humanity needs them. Uh, so the story of Tristan and Isolde or Romeo and Juliet,
Yeah.
that these are all very similar stories. These stories start to rise in the human consciousness at around the time of the Reformation, when so it used to be that you would find yourself and become complete when you are one with God. And then the Reformation happens, and humanity, on the whole, for Western society, falls out of love with that idea. And then we start to say, well, you become complete when you find your other half. And these stories,
Hmm.
Tristan and Isolde and Romeo and Juliet, are about the dangers of that. So I think stories become important or become told more when we need them. And I suppose that's what is that what makes a good story? I don't know. That's why stories become important. And then it's about how you tell the story that makes it good, good or bad. I mean, Aristotle's Poetics talks about, story structure, essentially there's comedy and tragedy and why those things work and don't work. And those ideas are intriguing, the sort of moral journey that characters need to go on. Stories are much more formulaic than we think, than we'd imagine they are when you start to really break them down. But
Yeah.
but stories are about learning. And then the magic, I suppose, maybe the magic of what makes it good. These are amazing questions. The magic of what makes it good is, what's a well told story or not a well told story? Well, you put sounds together, letters together, and they form words, and then you put words together and they form poetry and they become powerful and they start being more than just words. They start to have complex, multiple, deep meanings that
Yeah.
connect. And that that for me is the magic of the creative arts. It's the same for me. I play some notes and these notes are just random notes. But then these notes I play and suddenly these few notes have meaning. And when they have meaning, they're not just random notes anymore, and they're greater than the sum of their parts. They're not just notes. They have meaning, they have life. And that's the same with painting, same with drawing. And that's the magic I'm looking for when I'm creating.
Do you have like a favorite story? Just in general, like a story that has always meant a lot to you or that you really connected with?
Um, I think it's the same for for me. Different stories mean different things to me at different times, and I think we focus on them when we need them. I think perhaps an interesting example is I recently did made an audio book of 1984 George Orwell. I
Mm.
co-wrote the score for it with Matt Bellamy out of the band Muse. And so the last time I had read 1984, I'd been a teenager, maybe 15 years old. And and I reread it last summer. And it was such an extraordinary experience to be reading it now as a person who is the same age, if not older, than the Winston, the protagonist of the story, and to see it from a completely different perspective, and also to see it in light of the way the world has changed. Somehow, I think really well written stories remain relevant. Why does Shakespeare constantly seem relevant? Because there's something
Eh,
just so well written about it that the meaning of it changes. You know, I'm doing a production of As You Like It that's directed by Ray Fiennes at the moment, and just take one really silly example from it. The you know the main girl characters disguise themselves as boys and interact, and then as a boy she interacts with the the boy who's got a crush on her, and and so for years we just always looked at that as, oh well, women weren't allowed to act, and it was just a way of, it was sort of jokey, it was funny, it was part of the comedy. That's the way that we saw it. But now in the current climate, we see a girl being a boy and a boy. I mean, that has such important meaning in today's gendered, complicated gendered world that we live in, and the discussion around gender that really embodies it. And how did Shakespeare know? Right? Well, he didn't know, but there's something so incredible about his writing that it just continues to have meaning and relevance as the world evolves around it.
yeah, I mean, a lot of things obviously more things come into the spotlight now, and there are different periods of time when they do, but I'm sure even in Shakespeare's time, that idea, gender roles and gender discussions, I'm sure they did happen. It's just it didn't, it wasn't culturally as relevant or culturally as talked about as it is now. But I always think, history. I don't think always we're the first century to think of something, if you know what I mean. It
I
just,
think you're absolutely right. I think arguably there was more gender fluidity, and it was perhaps the Victorians and all the sort of rigid rules of the Victorians in the 19th century that really started to set about these clearer divides. I mean, I'm not a historian, and probably you'll get 1,000 comments saying that I'm completely wrong about that. I've no idea, but perhaps there is a lot of gender play in older literature. I mean, from Shakespeare to Chaucer to as far back as uh, uh Greek Greek plays.
yeah. Do you, I know for some people I've talked to, honestly, a lot of people recently, they think the world is getting worse. Like, I had one man I talked to, and he said to me, I don't think I want to live much longer. because I don't like the world. And so I don't really want to see how it's going to be anymore. And that really struck me for him to say that. And just most of the people I've interviewed recently have just said, I wish, they kind of just like are looking at the past as with this, they miss it or they want to go back. They don't like, they don't like now. And I wanted to ask you, like, for you, I mean, obviously being a composer and studying music and then seeing that you've studied English literature and that's evolved a huge bunch. Do you like the way that history has gone, or do you like how the world has evolved or grown or changed, however you want to put it? Or do you miss the past?
I, I think for me, I think we have to have hope
Mm,
because hope equals survival. And I want my daughter to survive and I want humanity to survive.
yeah,
And so we must be hopeful about the future. I think it's easy. I think we are living through a very troubled time. And I think that after the Second World War, we, which I'm very attached to, by the way, because, my grandmother uh, was in the French Resistance. I'm half French. My grandmother
yeah.
was in the French Resistance, and she fought in the war, and she was a very decorated war hero. But
Oh, wow.
she was captured by the Nazis, and she was given up. When she was at Auschwitz, and she was given up for being a Jew, and and
Wow.
most of my family were murdered by the Nazis. So World War II is something that's very connected to me, and I grew up with it and grew up talking to my grandmother about it. But after the Second World War, we enjoyed a time of great prosperity and great peace across the world. Um, and I think we really got used to that. And I think that it's starting to shift. The balance of power across the world is starting to shift. And people, 80 years later, have forgotten all the reasons why we said never again. The horrors of it are fading away.
Mm,
And so yes, we are seeing more wars, we're seeing political unrest, we're seeing nationalist agendas, we're seeing less, I mean, to not talk in political terms, just in sort of simple terms, less, hey, let's just all get along and be kind to each other, and more kind of, hey, back off, this is mine, I want to protect myself. And so for me, that is worrying. But, when you say looking back, well, on the whole, the world is a safer place. There's less crime on the whole, certainly in the Western world. Um, and medicine is incredible.
yeah.
Do I want to go? My father had a heart attack a few months ago. He's made an incredible recovery. And they he had to have a stent and they just go in through the wrist. It's a minor operation, you know. 20 years ago, it would have been open heart surgery with not a very high survival chance. And
Yeah.
30 years ago, he would have been dead. So,
Yeah.
so do I want to go back to that? Definitely not. And if you go back to pre-World War II, well, there was no antibiotics. Most people didn't have a hot shower. Do I want to go back to that? Absolutely not. We live a life of extraordinary luxury by comparison to any other time for human beings historically. And uh, and comparatively, we live in the most prosperous time that there has ever been for humanity. Not discounting all the misery and the poverty around the world, but but on the whole, things are much better than they've ever been. Do we have massive problems to solve? Climate, fossil fuels, all these things. Yes, absolutely. And the world is going to shift and going to change. And can we save ourselves? That remains to be seen. But I believe in humanity and I believe in the future. And I think we have to.
Yeah. No, I mean, I liked what you said before. If you don't have hope, I mean, there really isn't a reason to live, right? Because, I mean, you can live without hope, but it's very cold and unenjoyable existence.
And also there is an existential responsibility. I mean, aside from the sort of biological imperative of I want my daughter to survive
Yeah.
and live but there's also this sort of existential idea that okay, it is very likely that there is life across the universe. And in fact, there's very high probability, if you just look statistically at it, that there's intelligent life somewhere across the universe. But we don't know that there is. And if we really are the only example of atoms that have combined together to form life that is intelligent enough to be able to marvel at the universe, then surely we have a responsibility to try and protect that and to continue that forwards. Because in that scenario, then in many ways we're the purpose of the universe, right?
Yeah. I guess, when you were talking about the prosperity aspect, I totally agree with you there. What I've wondered sometimes is I find that, at least in films recently, and when I've talked to a lot of people, and even in my own self, there has been such a, I think even for young people especially, and maybe you've experienced this with your daughter, I don't know, but there's such a loss of meaning. There's such it's like this crisis of meaning, and everyone's trying to find it. And when you were talking about how if you find that other person, you'll be whole, it's like we kind of still have that, but now it's more of like you're supposed to feel whole in yourself, but even that's not really working. And you're finding all of this hopelessness, especially in my generation. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who just depression, anxiety, all of this stuff, and are just so alone in themselves, in their world, in themselves. And when I look back at history, I agree with you that there's just so many things that are much better, like medicine especially. I'm so grateful. Even the fact that we have medicine for mental health now, whereas before, if you had mental health, like even just 200 years ago, you'd probably be in a cage somewhere. But there seemed to be just so much more understanding of meaning, or at least where one's place was in the world. And I feel like now there's just no uh, landing ground for it. And a lot of people, it's just, there's this misery of like, well, where do I belong? What am I supposed to do? What's my purpose? And I felt like, at least reading, especially a lot of the writings, even Shakespeare in the past, there seemed to be so much more understanding of life, and just there was this connection. And it's not that you can't find it now. You definitely come across some things where you're like, ah, I understand that. But I feel like it's less than it was before. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I think that as we are more connected, we spend a lot of time looking at what other people have
Hmm.
and not focusing on ourselves and not being content in ourselves. Um, and I think, I worry, having a nearly 10-year-old daughter, I worry about uh, the smart devices and
Yeah.
social media. And I'm very aware that I can, look, I'm 48 years old and I'm successful at what I do. But if I go, I'm not a huge fan of social media. I mean, I don't find it very engaging on the whole, but I can be drawn into it if I'm doing some work stuff on Instagram or something, which I have to do from time to time. I can get drawn into it. And as I get drawn into it and I look at what my peers are doing, it can make me feel really terrible
Mm,
and really sort of it could give me anxiety, make me feel like I'm not doing great. And why did,
yeah.
why am I not working as much as that? But why did, I mean, a million things, right? And so if at 48 years old being really successful, uh, it can have that effect on me. Like, what's it doing to, younger people which by nature in your teenage years and your 20s, you have less self-confidence and more anxiety. That's just that's just the way of life and the passage of time. So I think that the kind of world, the scale of the world that we're living in, I think maybe it was a bit smaller when we all existed in sort of little villages of people. Um, and I think this idea that external things might make us happy is very problematic. If I do
Mm,
this course, if I study this thing, if I do this therapy, if I, then I will be happy. That I think is prevalent and but it's just people trying to sell you stuff. Happiness is, nothing's ever perfect. Happiness is found in the journey. And so as long as choosing, making an active choice. I mean, it's not always easy. I mean, God knows, I don't always wake up every morning happy, of course not. But I try as much as possible in my life to actively choose. Uh, uh, let's just be happy and try and have a good time today. And I don't know. That's what do I know about this stuff? I don't, it's we definitely live in complex times. I think the responsibility for one's own well-being is each individual's responsibility.
Yeah. Well, I wondered when you were talking about, because it almost sounds like you're talking about a contentment, right? When you event just being content, because social media is always showing you what you could do or what someone else is doing, and then you
Hmm.
just get like, you're like, oh, and then you start thinking about your own life, and then you're like, well, it's not like that, and then you're discontent, right? And maybe you
Hmm.
weren't before. And I was gonna ask you, how long in your life, like, did you come to a point in your life when you felt like contentment was easier for you? Or do you feel like it's still, is it harder or is it easier than when you were
It
young?
never gets easier.
No.
Never gets easier. No, of course not. It's always a journey. I'm always worried about the next job. I'm always worried that my work isn't good enough. I'm always worried that my parenting isn't good enough. I'm always what of course. But then I try to stop and take the moment and say, yeah, this is okay. Life is okay. And then you have like last Sunday just bumped into a friend and was having a drink with another friend, and my daughter was drawing, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and we sat outside the pub, and we just all had a great chat, and somehow just didn't have a care in the world. And at the
Hmm.
time, I didn't particularly think about it, but now you're asking me, and I think about that Sunday afternoon. I was like, yeah, those days are few and far between, but that was a really wonderful and content day. I mean, um, I think trying to be happy, trying to be content it's not something that finds you. It's not something that you deserve. It's something you have to work hard to get, to achieve.
Hmm. Yeah. it seems it's almost like composing, right? I would think that sometimes, I don't know. I mean, is composing for you, do you find it easy all the time, or sometimes it comes faster than others, or
Yeah,
it's
sometimes it comes faster than others, but I'm very disciplined about how I write. Because I'm raising my daughter, it's like I don't I don't have that much time, and I can't stay up all night, you know, writing music, or I can't, I have to start in the morning and I have to be done by the end of the afternoon. And so my process for doing that, and this totally connects with this conversation about happiness, contentment, being content, or anxiety, and this is all about managing that for me. So if I sit down and I think, okay, I've got to write like a work of genius by the end of the day, some incredible, amazing thing. Uh, and then I sit down in front of these 88 black and white notes, which, by the way, is the same 88 notes that Wagner sat in front of and Tchaikovsky sat in front of. And well, Beethoven didn't have quite 88 of them, but nearly all of them. So, but it's the same notes, right? It's the same notes that John Lennon sat in front of, right? And so, pick one, start, right? How do you do that? That's terrifying.
yeah.
Um, so I start my days thinking, just trying to be a bit more humble about it. I'm like, well, can I just write something really mediocre by the end of the day? Probably. That seems like an achievable challenge. And so I just aim for mediocrity. And it's true, 100% I do.
No, it's good.
And 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 with the idea that, well, tomorrow I'll look at it again and maybe it's terrible. Or maybe it's okay. And then I'm like, well, if I change that and I change that, then it might actually be good. Or sometimes, not often, I'm like, wow, that was actually a great day's work. That really is good. I'll just carry on. And but what's important about it is not writing anything is the worst thing, because that's when the anxiety sets in. Then you finish your day's work, you feel like you achieved nothing. You go to bed at night, you're questioning yourself, you're worried about, your lack of having achieved anything. Are you going to be able to write tomorrow? It's like it's a psychological spiral downwards, and that's where the anxiety sets in. So I don't it's very rare. It's only happened to me once in the last couple of years where I really was frustrated and didn't write anything in a day. It's like I just am disciplined. I sit down and I write something. It doesn't have to be good. It just has to be something. And then I can get up the next day and carry on. And I don't, and that way the anxiety and the worry and the despair doesn't get hold of you.
Yeah. No, that is that is such a good skill. I think I'm more of probably the more anxious type, where I just like stare at something for 2 hours, like a paper in college, and you're just like, I can't do this.
Right, but
Um,
you see, that's all about the ego, right? In the end, it's like
yeah, it's true.
because if you just take a lighter approach to it and say, you know what, I'm just going to write nonsense. I'm going to write the stupidest thing ever. You could do that, and then you could make it better later, and you'd feel better for it.
That's true.
It's
No,
like
I
just let it, it's moving the ego out of the way. The moving the pressure of I've got to do something and it's got to be good. Doesn't
no.
have.
Yeah, no, I agree. I should have talked to you when I was in college. You probably would have helped me write a lot more papers. Um, is there a composition you think you got just right? Because I was talking to a singer the other day and she said, I am not proud of any of my work. She said, I think my work is fine, but I couldn't tell you of a work that I thought was that I got right. And I wondered if for you, like, is there a composition that you listen to and you're like, that is fine, that is good. I wouldn't have changed it.
Not really. I think for me, the what I really love is I don't love the finished product. What I love is making it. I love the journey of doing it.
Mm.
That's what I'm really in love with. I could take or leave the end result. I don't think there's anything that I would listen to that I wouldn't say, well, I could change that. That would have been a better performance. That would have been a better arrangement. That would have been absolutely everything is improvable. There does come a point for me, I'm realizing now, when 20 years has passed by nearly, and I'll listen to something, and it's almost like listening to something that somebody else wrote, and I can be less hard on myself. I feel a little bit that way about the young Victoria. Um, I know it's a favorite of yours. It is a very honest composition. I was very much in love with somebody when I was writing it.
Oh,
And
really? Wow.
so yeah, so it is a very deeply honest composition. And but one of the things that I'm very proud of about it is that ever since I wrote it, a week doesn't go by that I don't get an email from somebody somewhere asking me for music because they want it performed at their wedding. They want it
Oh,
to be,
wow.
they want to walk down the aisle to it. They want to have a first dance to it. And that's literally ones that I know of, thousands of weddings. And so to have been in some small way part of people's really special moments, to be able to have written something that allows them to feel what they want to feel in that special moment, that's incredibly humbling, and
Hmm.
uh and is one of the things that I'm most proud of.
Is it
Even if I
hard
would
for
have changed it.
But is it hard for you to listen to? Does it bring back sad memories? Because
No, not at all. No.
no,
Like
because
it's a
it sounded like the person you said you loved, it didn't end up working.
no, it didn't. But no, it's not sad at all because it's an honest expression of how I feel, of my emotion. And
Yeah.
so I suppose as a composition, as a that main melody, and in fact all the melodies in it, I wouldn't change those. Would I change the arrangement and things like that? Improve the recordings? Yes. But the melodies are quite complete. And like I say, they're very honest. They're very much me bearing my soul. So and at first I felt shy about that, but now I'm more proud of it.
Well, that's interesting. Why would you be shy? Because would anyone really know though? Because they're watching the
But I
movie.
mean, whether anyone knows or doesn't know, it's still you bearing your soul. It's very personal to me.
Hmm. That's so interesting. Yeah. Because but though you think about it, and people do remember the music from the movie. That's what sticks out to you so much a lot of times is the music. Um, is there is there a particular track from The Young Victoria that you really like, or is it the main theme when you're talking about the melody?
The main theme, but there's also uh Victoria's theme that sort of
Yeah.
intertwines with it. And there's one of the letters pieces of music. I can't remember whether it's letters to Albert or letters to Victoria. I think it's the letter to Victoria. It's just got a beautiful sweetness to it that, you know, I don't know. Yeah, it does all mean a lot to me.
Yeah. Do you find that you feel most restful when you're playing music? Or is it because I know you said you enjoy the process, but I wonder, is that like a restful period for you
Not
when you're doing this?
sometimes. Sometimes I'm
No.
working under tremendous pressure and it's a terrible panic. Um, the moment of creativity earlier on, we talked about this magical moment where the notes stop just being notes and become greater than the sum of their parts and have meaning.
Yeah.
That process, that magical moment is only happens when you're completely lost in a sort of meditative state, unaware of anything else other than the moment that you're in. And and that is a sort of bliss in itself. We talked about you know whiling away a sunny afternoon and just feeling content. That's like one of those moments when it happens. And and then I wonder, when you find those notes and they have meaning, did they always have that meaning and I just found them, or did I breathe life into those notes and give them their meaning?
What do you think? Do you know?
No, maybe it's a bit of both. I can't answer it. It's just sort of a philosophical musing.
Well, I was gonna say, I know you're a composer, but you seem like you're a very philosophical person.
Well, as you said at the start, I studied literature at university, and I'm just very bookish, and I read a lot, and I, perhaps over intellectualize a little bit. Um, I'm very interested. I'm interested in knowledge. I think, you know, one of the one of the greatest gifts that humanity ever got was the book. The Like that leap in technology of these thoughts that are in my mind, I'm going to put them in this thing that can then be passed down for thousands of years.
Yeah.
I mean, what a gift, right? And so why wouldn't you try and absorb as much of that as possible? That's how I feel about it.
No, I agree. I wish more people felt that. There's, I don't want to say this about the US. It's not, I don't, there's not a way to generalize or anything, but I wish more people loved books. It's becoming a less loved or valued thing, I think, here. Anyway, with young people, we're
I think
not.
all over the world, but we consume in many different ways, right? What gives me hope in this area is the audiobook industry is growing exponentially. It's getting,
Yeah, that's true.
and so, that's fine. Oral tradition is fine, and audio books and podcasts. This is new technology, but actually, you know, we have, you know, conversations with Plato written out, and that's a Greek version of a podcast. And Homer, when he wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, they were poems that were sung. It was an oral tradition. Homer didn't write it down, or not that we know of. They were written down centuries later. It
Yeah.
was an oral tradition that was passed on. So the audiobook is just oral tradition.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, I didn't think about that. It
Tell,
is.
Telling stories is the oldest. Like when cavemen made cave paintings, they were telling stories. That is what it is to be human. Is to have been passed down stories and to continue to pass them on to the future generations. That's what culture is. That's what society is ultimately.
Well,
And whatever format that takes, whether that's an audiobook or a TV show or a film or a video game, even, is a great video games are telling some of the greatest stories at the moment. It doesn't matter really. They're just different forms of the same tradition.
Well, because I want to be respectful of your time, I guess the last question I'd ask you is what would you like people to, because you're passing down stories for your music, for your life, what would you hope that your daughter or just those you love or, people who listen to your music in general, what would you like them to glean from your story?
If by my story you mean the music that I'm putting out into the world,
Yeah, and also your
I-
life, because I feel like you put yourself into your music, because you were mentioning that in the Young Victoria. I feel
well, for
like
sure.
there's both, right?
I would like, well, my music is the testament of who I am. And I would be very content to know that it meant something to people, uh, and continued to mean something to people. Um, I don't think it matters. I guess all artists hope to be relevant and remain relevant in some way. What it means to people is for them to decide. But I hope that my work is worthy of being listened to for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I have children, they will be listening to your music and watching Young Victoria, and I will say, I met this man one day.
Thank you so much.
But thank you so much for talking with me. You are just, it's so, I feel like I could sit down, have a cup of tea, and just listen to you talk for quite a while. You have some very deep thoughts, and I think it's so, I mean, it's very honest of you to share them, I think, because I think a lot of people would be a little, like you said, it's vulnerable, it's scary, but I really appreciate the fact that you are willing to talk about so many different things as well as
This
your
is great.
music.
I loved, I barely talked about music at all. I really enjoyed it. This was great to talk about all of these things. Just questions.
Well,
Thanks so much.
you're very welcome and have a good work day of making something maybe mediocre that turns out great.
I hope so.
All right, bye.
Bye bye.